What's up, Inside Out? Hey, happy spring break for all of you guys that just got back from spring. How many of you guys are traveling this week? Cool. How many of you folks stayed home, stayed local? Me, yeah, I know, not as exciting for that. But hey, I hope you had a great week off from school. If you took off from work, leaders, I hope you had a great week off. For everybody else, I'm really sorry it's having come to an end, but I think you're at the best place you could be as you wrap up your spring break. Thank you guys so much for being at Inside Out tonight. If you're new here, it's your first time, welcome to Inside Out. I feel like this is the best place you can be on a Sunday. Hey, tonight we're kicking off a new series. It's called If You Know, You Know. Shorthand here. For some of you, that might be, I feel like I read that 3 times trying to pronounce it before I realized it was shorthand because I'm old. And so I realized, I was like, hey, if you know, you know. It's, obviously it's an expression of like, hey, if you have the background knowledge, you kind of know the inside scoop, the inside story. And so I was thinking about like knowing the inside scoop, the inside story, knowing the background information. I kind of got down this rabbit hole this week. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten on Reddit and gotten sucked into a rabbit hole in there, but I got into one on conspiracy theories. How many of you guys in here are into like conspiracy theories? You watch those like documentaries on TV? Okay, cool. A few of you. All right, I get sucked into those really easily. Not because I believe all of them, but because I'm fascinated at the people who do. And I found several of them which I thought were fascinating. I started polling people, asking people I knew what were some conspiracy theories that they kind of bought into. I heard a lot of crazy stuff. I heard some stuff that I was like, yeah, I think that might be true too. But I polled the audience, and I got a few of conspiracy theories I want to share with you guys today. There's some people that believe the moon landing is fake, that we have not actually been to the moon, that it was done on a soundstage in Hollywood. It's kind of ironic that it happened in like the 1960s when cameras weren't as good, and nowadays you could see the moon HD, but we don't have the money to go back. Okay, so some people buy into the moon landing being fake. I'm not one of those. I'm just making their case. All right, the second one. Some people believe the earth is flat. Yeah. Wow. I did not expect that. I didn't see that coming. I should have seen that coming. I didn't. Kyrie Irving, a famous NBA player, has had this belief for a long time. I feel like we settled this a long time ago with like Magellan and Columbus and all those guys, but that's still a theory that's out there. The world is actually flat and that we're all being duped. So there's one. Third one, the Illuminati runs the world. Guys, there's a lot about there on this. If you're not familiar with the Illuminati, it's basically like a Nicolas Cage movie, like cranked up to the max. It's just all the like secret societies run the world and kind of stuff. Really, really dark rabbit hole. Stay out of that one. Number 4, that we're all living in a simulation. This is one of the most fascinating ones because they all believe that all this isn't real and it's all like virtual reality that we're all just watching together, which I was like, that's not true, right? Like people are real. Like Chris Rock would say that like Will Smith is real and he got slapped in the face, right? Like it's not a simulation. The world is real. But then somebody made an argument to me that said, okay, answer me this. How come there's always people shopping at the grocery store, but when you get home, you never see your neighbors carrying groceries into the house? And I was like, man, I never have seen my neighbors carrying groceries into the house before. So now, like every day when I get home, I kind of look through the blinds and look to see if my neighbors are coming in from the grocery store with groceries or not, or if they're real people. So I don't know. I'm not saying it's real. I'm just saying I have questions now. And this last one is a huge social experiment. A lot of momentum on birds not being real. If you're like me, and this is new to you, there's a conspiracy theory that birds are just government drones sent out to spy on us and that birds aren't real. Some people say they're aliens. I'm getting educated as we speak. This is an interactive talk. I didn't realize until this moment. So you can see there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. And I tell you this because the thing with conspiracy theories there's just enough truth to make you wonder, right? Like usually they start with something that's like you can easily buy into. And then the further and further down the rabbit hole you go, you're kind of into it. And the next thing you know, you believe, like you're like watching the robin in your front yard look for worms. And you're like, second guessing things. You're turning off the Wi-Fi. Like you're freaking out. Like it's a rabbit hole that we kind of go down to. Well, essentially what happens is the line between truth and lies gets really blurry with conspiracy theories. Like you're not really able to figure out what's true and what's not anymore. And I think that's really important to us because this week, as we get ready to celebrate, Abigail talked about it a minute ago, we're getting ready to celebrate the story of Easter. And in the story of Easter, I'm going to be straight with you guys. There's a lot of stuff in the story of Easter that taken on surface level is kind of tough to believe, right? That like 2,000 years ago, there was this Jewish guy who by all accounts lived a good life. He was falsely arrested, given a trial, and then put to death. And then some people claim that he came back to life. That's the story of Easter, like full stop, that's the story. But if you think about it, like, hey, that can be kind of hard to believe. And a lot of people would say, hey, I just can't believe that. And if that's you, I understand. And today, as we kick off the series, if you know, you know, I want to talk to you a little bit about why I believe the story of Jesus, and specifically the story of Easter, is something that you can believe, something that you can buy into way more than any conspiracy theory ever will be. Because there's so much to it that I feel like clarifies and clears up that blurry line between what's true and what's real and what's lies and what's not. And so tonight I'm going to give you 3 reasons of why that is. Because I feel like for all of us, we have sometimes, we would say this is true, that sometimes it's hard to know what to believe. And so sometimes we just need like a good explanation, a good handlebar on something that might be more difficult to believe. We need it to be made clear and simple and easy for us. And so tonight, that's my goal. I hope I can make the story of Easter and the thing that we're going to be celebrating not only next Sunday here at Brownsbridge, but really all week as Christians, why it's so important, why we hold on to it, and most importantly, why it's believable. So I've got 3 things for you tonight that I think is going to make the Easter story a little bit easier to believe. All right, here's number 1. It's a historical account, not just a story. And you're probably asking yourself, okay, Heath, well, what's the difference? An historical account is a story of is a written or told retelling of actual things that happened. A story, on the other hand, is more like a conspiracy theory. There's enough truth to move the dialogue along, but sometimes there's liberties being taken there. Like I think about it when I was a kid. I grew up in like a small town. We had a lake, and fishing was a big thing. And I feel like there was always these fishing stories being told about how many fish were caught, or, you know, you'd go fishing with somebody and you'd see the fish they caught and it would be, you know, this big. And by the time you got to school the next day, it was, I caught one that was this big. You know, it's like the story becomes better the more you embellish the details. Last night, my wife and I were watching the movie Remember the Titans. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, Remember the Titans. It's on Disney Plus, worth your watch if you haven't seen it. But the movie Remember the Titans, I was watching it, and it came out when I was younger, probably about some of you guys' age. And first time I watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing story. And then one day I caught this thing on TV that was like, hey, the real story of Remember the Titans. And I was like, oh, I love that movie. I'm going to watch this. And basically, the little documentary went through and said, yeah, like 90% of what's in the movie is made up, never actually happened. It was basically just a story of a football team that was 2 high schools got combined, a white high school and a black high school, and they came together, and their football team figured out how to love each other, and they had an undefeated season. Like, spoiler alert. But then it's like, hey, a lot of the stuff and the events and the things that happened in the story were really kind of embellished and made up to make the movie better, to make the movie more interesting, to make the characters more believable, to make it something that you felt more than you just watched. And so an historical account is different. It doesn't embellish anything. It tells you just the facts, and that's all it is. And in our Bibles, we're giving 4 historical accounts of the life and story of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these 4 guys all wrote their gospel or the good news of Jesus by their historical account. And in his account, the Gospel of Luke opens up like this. He tells you exactly what he's doing. This is the first 4 verses of Luke. He says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. He said, hey, basically, a lot of people are trying to put together a story of what just happened. Here's what Luke says. He says, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that's the guy he's writing to, so that you may know this with certainty of the things that you have been taught. Luke's saying, hey, I know there's a lot out there that maybe you guys have heard. Some of it's true, some of it's not. I've done the research. I've done the digging. I've talked to the people. I've done the interviews. I've done all the work so that you can know with clarity and truth what's true and not about this guy, Jesus. It's literally how he kicks off his letter or his account of Jesus' life. He's like saying, hey, by all accounts, everything that I'm about to tell you, I've done the research and it's all true. So he basically kind of tells us, like, we don't have to worry about what's in there, whether it's true or not. He says, I've talked to the people. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've talked to other people who've seen it with their own eyes, and we've compiled all of our stories. I've gotten rid of everything that didn't match up, and all the stuff that was consistent around multiple people. That's what I've kept in, and here's my story of Jesus' life. And so as we read these Gospels, all these Gospel writers kind of took the time to craft and create what they witnessed, what they saw with their eyes. And Luke says, hey, this is not just some story that I've been given or I've been told. This is what I've seen. And this is what the people that I know have seen. And that's how we can know that the stories of Jesus are not just stories, but they're historical accounts of what actually happened. The second one is this. Not only is it a historical account, it's specific and verifiable. Now, specific and verifiable means that, hey, there's a lot of details given. In fact, so many details are given that if any of the details weren't true, there are dozens of people that could have said, hey, man, that's not true. That's incorrect. Because the thing about Jesus is he's not just a Christian figure that we've drummed up. There are historians from the Roman Empire, guys named Pliny and Tacitus, who I've practiced saying their names all week and just nailed it. I'm so proud of myself. There's a Jewish historian. Thank you so much for appreciating. There is a Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus who wrote down all of the stories of Jesus from a Jewish perspective. And these guys don't believe Jesus. They wouldn't call themselves Christians, but they're like, hey, there's this guy that made a big deal, and we all saw him, and we all know what happens. I'm not sure that he rose from the dead, but this is a thing. And so the stories of Jesus are very specific, so much so that historians who wouldn't call themselves Christians have in their notes stories and accounts of Jesus. And it's all very verifiable. In the accounts of Jesus in the New Testament, we see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John taking painstaking detail to give us stuff that happened. Mark's story of Jesus is so fast-paced, and he goes so quickly because he gets to the resurrection of Jesus and basically just stops. He's basically like someone telling you a story, and he's like, and that pretty much brings us to now. Yeah, he's back from the dead, gotta go. Like, Mark's is so fast-paced and so quick that like he leaves off when Jesus rises from the dead, and we don't really know what happens next because he quits writing. Luke's account, obviously, we read that he did all of his background research to make sure every detail and everything is correctly written, that we can trust and justify everything that he says. John, who was one of Jesus' best friends in the whole world, had a front row seat to his entire life. And he gives such specific and verifiable details that he talks about when he and Peter heard Jesus was back from the dead, that they literally ran to their tomb together. And he's so petty that he includes a detail that says, and I got there first, because he's clearly that guy that's like, yeah, well, Peter and I ran to the tomb. I was the winner. And, moving on back to Jesus, right? Like, he gives like personal details that don't matter at all to the story. And the guy that does it probably the most is Matthew. I started trying to list all the ways that Matthew gives painstaking and specific details that if they weren't true, there's people that could just say, hey, that's not true. Hey, that's about me. That's not how it happens. That he gives so many, these are just in like the last two chapters, the events leading up to Jesus' death and resurrection, Matthew 26 and 27. All of these things Matthew says. He talks about that this happens on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread. He gives a time frame. He talks about Jesus and his disciples going to a place called Gethsemane. He gave a specific place where they were. He says that those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. He's now name-dropping religious leaders in their day. He says that the governors, they bound him and took him away to the governor who was named Pilate. Again, name-dropping. He's like, hey, they brought him in front of the highest, most important guy in the land. It wasn't just like some random people. He's name-dropping the people who were leaders. People could look up, well, was Pilate the actual governor of Judea during that time? Yeah, he was. Like, it's verifiable. He goes on to say it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. I'm really sorry. I don't know if that's me or not. But it was a custom to release a prisoner. And he's like, hey, this is a specific thing that happened. You can look it up. It still happens, as they're writing this. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. You could go find Simon and be like, hey, did you actually carry Jesus' cross? Oh, you did? Okay, well, that's verifiable. They took him to a place called Golgotha to be crucified. That was an actual place in the city of Jerusalem, and it was shaped like a skull, which is what that name means. And then from noon until 3, there was darkness. Again, a specific time frame. He's given these like very specific, intricate details. Among the people who were with Jesus when he died were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mothers of Zebedee. Again, specific people who were there to say, I watched Jesus hang on the cross. I watched him die. And then as evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph. who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. And going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him so he can put it in his family grave. That literally the guy who buried Jesus can say, like, hey, I watched him die. I know he was dead. I helped bury him. He was in my family's grave. Matthew gives so much detail because he wants everybody to see how specific and verifiable the stories of Jesus are. And the Apostle Paul is no different. In 1 Corinthians 15, he says it like this. He says, for what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters. And then again, he gives you specific and verifiable details. He says, most of whom are still living. Like, if you don't believe me, there's 500 people who saw him. Go talk to them. Though some of them have fallen asleep. Well, they're not all living. But then he says, then he appeared to James, who is Jesus' brother, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. Paul's like, hey, listen, if you don't believe me, here's a list of people you can go talk to. He's like, you don't have to believe me. I can give you 500 other people, including Jesus' own brother. Our lead pastor, Andy Stanley, likes to point out, to be like, do you know how true it has to be for Jesus' own brother to claim him to be the Messiah, the Son of God? Like, imagine for a minute if you have a sibling, you go home tonight, and they come to you and say, hey, so mom and dad aren't my real mom and dad. I'm actually God's son, and I have superpowers, and I can walk on water and heal people. You'd be like, absolutely not. Like, you can't even put the toilet seat down. Like, how are you going to bring people back from the dead? Like, that's the most unbelievable. Like, if anybody's not going to believe in Jesus, it's going to be his little brother, right? But even Paul lists him out and says, like, hey, even his own family has come around to believing that he is who he says he was, because it's specific and verifiable. And last point, number 3, is that Jesus' followers staked their entire lives on it. All those people, those 500 people, his 12 disciples, his brother, all the people who saw Jesus alive, put their very lives on the line. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about Jesus' death and resurrection. And some people say that, well, he didn't actually die, that he faked it. Or some people say, well, he didn't actually rise from the dead. His disciples just stole his body and rolled the tomb away and claimed he came back to life. And there's all these like conspiracy theories, these stories that blur the truth and lies, trying to disclaim this. But one thing they can't disclaim is the people who saw Jesus come back from the dead gave their lives for it. And I don't know about you, but I don't know for certain whether or not birds are real. Can't tell you. But I guarantee you, gun to my head, I am not giving my life for it one way or the other. I don't care enough. I don't believe it enough. It's not something I'm willing to give my life for, whether birds are real. It's not something I'm worth giving my life for, whether or not we landed on the moon. It doesn't really matter to me, ultimately. But there are people for thousands of years who've given their very lives, believing and claiming that Jesus not only gave his life, but he came back from the dead so that you and I can experience a new life, freedom in him. Because what this means is that if Jesus came back from the dead, it changes the game on everything. Paul says it this way in 1 Corinthians 15. He says that if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. All of the Christian faith, all of the faith of this church, all of the faith of the people in this room are hinged on Jesus coming back from the dead. Because if Jesus came back from the dead, then that means his death mattered. That when he died on the cross, he didn't just die for my sins, he died for your sins and the person who you're sitting next to, their sins, and your parents and every person you've ever known. He died for them. And if he died for all their sins, the way Jesus lived his life and the way he taught his followers to live their lives matters to you, because he modeled to us how we should be living our lives. And from all this evidence, one thing is very clear. One clear conclusion we can get: God raised Jesus from the dead. And he did it because he had a very specific purpose in mind. And it wasn't to give another conspiracy theory. We're good at coming up with conspiracy theories. We didn't need another one. God raised Jesus from the dead because he had one thing very specific in mind, is that God himself wanted you to know that he loves you, he cares about you, and he doesn't want you to stay chained to the things that make your life more difficult. So he sent Jesus to die for you. He raised him from the dead to prove that it worked, and he offers you a new life with him. And if that's the faith that you ascribe to, if that's the faith that you've given your life to, I want you guys to know this one thing, is that your faith can and should be informed. Listen, you guys are old enough now that your faith is now yours. You know, if you came to Browns Bridge while you were in middle school and you came up through Transit has this catchphrase is that my faith is, what is it, a faith of our own? I have a faith of my own. And so if you guys are in high school now, like there's a literal point in time where we start saying, hey, like just because your mom and dad believe doesn't make you a Christian. Just because you were raised in a Christian household doesn't mean that this is true for you. Just because you've been to Browns Bridge or some other church for most of your life doesn't mean that the story of Jesus has changed you. See, I was one of those kids. I was raised in church. My parents took me to church from the time I can remember. I used to tell people, I used to joke. I would say, hey, like growing up, I had a really bad drug problem. And I didn't really have a drug problem. My parents just drugged me to church every Sunday, whether I wanted to go or not. And what happened was, though, I began to believe that made me a good person, and that made me lovable to God. That made me the kind of person that God approved of. But it wasn't until I was in high school, when I was your age, when it finally clicked for me that it doesn't matter if your family goes to church, it doesn't matter if you've been to church every Sunday your entire life, it doesn't matter if you never come back after today. If you don't know this to be true about who Jesus is and what he's done for you and how he's inviting you to a new and better life, then this is just another theory, another list of things that you can believe or you cannot believe. It's up to you. But if it's something that you have made your own and it's now your faith, it should be something that changes the way you live your life and changes how you treat people each and every day. So today, as we wrap up, I want to give you guys two things that I want every single person in the room to kind of take with them today. If you are here today and you have doubts, you have questions, you're not really sure if Jesus is who I claim him to be, listen here, guys. I am just a dude with a microphone on his face. I could be wrong. If you have questions about Jesus, I invite you, I ask you to look them up for yourselves. Talk to other people, talk to your small group leader, talk to your parents, talk to people that you look up to, talk to the person sitting next to you, go to your small group in a few minutes, and I want you to own your questions. Questions are okay. People have been asking questions about Jesus for 2,000 years. That's the reason guys like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter, all these guys wrote things down, because people have had questions about Jesus and about whether or not his death was for real, about whether or not he came back from the dead for real, about whether or not this option that God has given us to have a new life is for real. But if you have questions, hey, it's okay. Own your questions. If you have questions about faith, this is the best place for you to be, because all of us have questions when it comes to faith. What I wanted to do is create a place here where it's safe enough for you to come with your questions, to talk about them, and feel like you can be supported, you can be heard. Some of your questions can be answered, and if they can't be, you'll have people who will that's a great question. We'll find out together. So every person in this room, I hope you can own your questions. Questions are good. Questions are okay. And in a few minutes, I hope you guys go ask a ton of questions in group. Second thing is this. I want you to consider Easter in the accounts of Jesus again. See, this week, Abigail talked about it a minute ago, we call it Holy Week, and it's the week leading up to Easter where we celebrate Jesus' resurrection from the dead. And this year for Easter, I'd like to ask you guys two things. Number one, please don't take my word for it anymore, or any other pastor or any other person on stage. Don't take our words for it. If you want to hear the stories of Jesus, take a Bible or take an app, get on the internet. It's on the internet if you don't have a Bible. Read the last couple chapters of Matthew, of Mark, of Luke, of John. See how many specific details they give you in their historic accounts. And see how they believed with every ounce of their being, so much so that most of them died for what they wrote down. And as next Sunday rolls around, I want to invite you guys and your families to join us here at our church. We're going to have 3 Easter services next weekend, Saturday night at 5 p.m., Sunday at 9, and Sunday at 11. I would love for you and your family to come as we celebrate and talk about and remember once again the story of Jesus. Not just because of what he did, but because of what it means for our lives. Because it's a pretty cool story if Jesus just dies on the cross and comes back from the dead. That's a cool trick. Like, it's really impressive. Not very many people can predict their own death and resurrection and then pull it off, right? Like, that's impressive. But the important part is how it changes your life when you believe that. That when you believe that, you're now obligated to begin to treat people like Jesus did. To look at people as people to be loved, to be able to treat people with fairness and equality, to be able to love people no matter what they look like, where they come from, how they treat you in return. If if you believe this stuff, it should change the way you live your life. And if you don't believe this, that's okay. But I think your faith should be informed. And I think you guys are old enough now to do your own digging and your own research, and that you shouldn't have to take my word for it or anybody else's word for it who comes on the stage. So tonight, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to close in prayer, and then the band's going to come back up. They're going to sing one more song for us. And if you've been around our church for a long time, you know the song, okay? It talks about Jesus' death and resurrection a lot. But I want you to think about the words and to think about not just if it happened, but also, more importantly, what it means for you individually in your lives and how your life this week is going to be different because of what Jesus did for you. So if you guys will, bow your heads, link up, pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Jesus. God, I know in a place where there are so many things that we're given each day, so many pieces of information, oftentimes misinformation. Lord, it's sometimes hard for us to know what we can and cannot trust, what we are or what we are not supposed to believe. And so God, for every high school student, for every leader in this room, God, I pray that today they would walk out of here fully understanding this is a safe place to ask questions, that if they have doubts or unanswered questions about Jesus, like, hey, this is the best place you could be for them, is at church. But also, God, just that they would leave here today knowing that if they believe in Jesus and they've given their life to him and they trust him, that it's worth giving a life to. That God, the reason that we take time to talk about Jesus and we talk about his death, we talk about his resurrection, and we set aside this whole week to celebrate it as Christians is because Jesus' death and resurrection changed everything. It changed my life, changed the life of so many people in this room. And God, for some people in this room, it may not have changed their lives yet. But I pray that this week, as they begin to consider Easter and the story of Easter and the accounts of the eyewitnesses and what people saw and experienced and the new life that they have in Jesus, that every single one of us in this room would either look back on that moment in our life where that became reality for us, or we would begin to ask ourselves that question of like, hey, if this life was all there is, am I cool with that? Or do I believe that there could be more? And maybe there is something in this Jesus. So God, for each and every one of us today, regardless of where we are, regardless of where our questions lie, regardless of if we have answers, if we'll ever have answers, Lord, I pray that this would be a safe place for us to ask questions, to be our true selves. We would be supported and loved no matter what. And then most of all, we would just be reminded week in and week out that we're not perfect, never will be, but that we are so loved by you, so much so that you sent your son Jesus to die in our place, and you raised him from the dead so that we can have a second chance at life. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.